Good evening. I'm Deborah Strad, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. This presentation explains Article 8, Addressing Systemic Racism. We acknowledge both free and enslaved Black people lived in Lexington in 1775, and Black people joined on the battle green. Lexington is built upon the traditional lands of Indigenous people. We acknowledge those who first occupied all of what is now called North and South America. Some still live on their original land, some were relocated, some were enslaved, and many were victims of genocide. Thanks to the presentation team, those who helped write the resolution, and the over 200 town residents who signed the petition. This resolution enables our most positive visions of Lexington, encouraging town actions to address legacies of exploitation coexisting with our many strengths. While non-binding, it enhances Lexington's collective approach to the important issues of race and equity. Until now, the voice of town meeting hasn't been heard. We need sustained, coordinated approaches. We need a systemic response to a systemic problem. This presentation will share key concepts, then walk through the resolution text. Tonight, we use examples, not naming every relevant group or identity, excluding some of our own. We all have different experience, knowledge, and comfort in this area. Please stick with us and each other if terms are new to you or used in new ways. While our presentation and debate may be imperfect, we have to keep talking in order to move forward and act. As this picture illustrates, our sense of equality, giving everyone on the left the same thing, one box to stand on, doesn't necessarily result in equity, everyone reaching the apples. And inequity is an unjust difference in outcome. On the right, with resources shifted to match height, all three can reach. That is an equitable outcome, a positive equity impact. Yet we didn't ask, who isn't here and why? Did they not know apples are ripe, not have transport, need a ramp? Is one person taller because they have food, healthcare, and a safe environment while others don't? Or is one just younger? What it takes to thrive in Lexington is the same as elsewhere. Safety, health, education, housing, economic opportunities, the outdoors. We must ask the right questions about who has access and why to learn the answers and address them. By systemic racism, we mean a system of advantages which gives privilege and power to one racialized group over another, intentional or not. Historic examples include exclusion of occupations held mostly by Black people from benefits of the New Deal, and the forced expulsion of hundreds of thousands of US citizens of Mexican descent in the same time period. A current example would be health or criminal justice systems using algorithms trained only on data from white people and then applied to other populations. By white privilege, we mean when people racialized as white are as a group privileged or empowered over other groups and have an absence of various inconveniences and obstacles in daily life based on lighter skin color. This can be as simple as going into a store without being followed or stared at, the kind of unconscious privilege you just don't think about, but which can be a built-in advantage separate from your level of income or effort. Having white privilege does not mean that every white person has it easy, or that everything a white person has accomplished is unearned. It just means that being subject to racism against people of color isn't one of that person's challenges. In discussing impacts, we lead with some of our Black residents' experiences and reports of local and national challenges, higher rates of COVID, disparities in both AP access and school discipline, being profiled, and trauma from deaths of Black people at the hands of police elsewhere. Our police have de-escalation skills and have not killed Black people. Yet those deaths elsewhere and the overrepresentation of people of color in prison nevertheless affect the relationship between our police and our Black and brown residents and many others. Lexington aims to be a great place for all. Racism creates a pathway for othering and exclusion. From the nation's founding, people were left out of the definition of all. All men are created equal didn't cover women or people of other gender identities, and it only included white people. In Lexington, people of many races, including white people, experience hunger. Immigrants need support. Asians are stereotyped as model minorities and subject to bias regarding COVID. Inequities can also come from the intersection of racism with bias toward other aspects of people's lives, including faith. Once they occur, impacts from systemic racism endure through generations. One example is the loss of wealth accumulation for descendants of enslaved people. Another, the loss of homes and jobs when Japanese Americans were kept in US internment camps in World War II. We have begun to understand the ongoing physical and mental health impacts of chronic stress and deprivation, as well as the impacts of intergenerational trauma and cultural loss. Economic effects endure too. A 2015 Harvard Business Review reported racial health inequities cost the economy about $245 billion in excess healthcare expenditures, illness-related lost productivity, and premature deaths. But if we design for the most marginalized, we can benefit everyone. As you can see from the long list of examples, don't try to read it. Lexingtonians, of course, respond to these challenges. Residents, town departments, businesses, and faith groups have created chances to learn, share, provide support, and advocate. These individual initiatives are important. Yet, as other communities have shown across the country, a systemic problem requires a systemic response as well as goodwill and involved people. So how could we do this? Now on to the resolution text. This resolution asks the town to systematize some ways to identify, address, and prevent inequities. Section A asks that the town raise questions like we asked with the apples and the kind of impacts we just discussed in all decisions and planning processes, so no bias exists where the questions get asked. This will help find those policies and practices which already address inequities, and we should maintain them, and those where we may produce inequity. This is the kind of work the Select Board has been championing, and it is the kind of deliberate attention it will take to disentangle aspects of systemic racism and white privilege that may be baked in and even seem normal. A positive example of this kind of process at work happened when fewer board, committee, and town meeting members were of Asian heritage. Both the Chinese American Association of Lexington and the Indian Americans of Lexington created ways to engage, while the town added better information flow to those groups. Now there is much better representation, and we still should ask who is missing. The goal of Section B is to use or adapt existing tools to ease implementation and provide consistency. Examples from the National League of Cities expand on the questions we asked earlier. Such tools can help town leaders and staff not only to think about racial inequities, but also to consider all populations which might be affected positively or negatively. Data is at the heart of decision-making. Both numbers and people's stories are important. This resolution asks that we ensure town staff have the information needed and capacity to use these types of data. We have locally relevant data, but which data sources are reviewed regularly with an equity lens? For example, polluting operations are often located near where people of color or lower income live. What do we know about environmental justice in Lexington? Having a plan helps maintain progress and keep a system accountable, even through personnel change. There are many resources for creating a plan. Section D asks for a plan to include staff training, hiring practices, and public education with public input. We will work better together with common framings and words and clear public voice. Training is important, as is making accountability transparent. Having a DEI officer in town hall could help with implementation. Here it is all together. Lexington can be a great place to live, and for many people it is. Yet true equity demands that we look at our practices and outcomes in detail and do better to make Lexington a truly equitable community. Thank you. Please vote yes on this resolution. Our freedoms and future are indeed bound up together, and we are still struggling to implement the concept of liberty and justice for all.